The brink of extinction. The world had changed, irrevocably, in the span of just a few decades. The climate crisis had intensified, turning once fertile farmlands into deserts, where nothing grew but dust. The oceans had risen, swallowing coastlines, and leaving entire cities submerged. The air was thick with pollutants, the sky a dull gray, choked by the fumes of factories long abandoned. What was once a thriving planet, rich with life and human achievement, now teetered on the edge of extinction. Humanity had tried to fight back. Scientists, engineers, and world leaders had worked tirelessly to reverse the damage done to the environment. New technologies were developed, and humanity had begun to embrace renewable energy. But it was too little, too late. The damage was done, and the Earth had begun to slowly suffocate under the weight of its own exploitation. Now, humanity was faced with the grim reality. The planet could not sustain life much longer. In the heart of what was once North America, now the last bastion of civilization, a small group of the world's remaining leaders gathered in a high-tech underground command center. The air was heavy with the scent of stale coffee, a sharp contrast to the high-tech gadgets and equipment surrounding them. This room, tucked beneath layers of concrete and metal, was where the fate of the human race was to be decided. Captain Alina Harper stood at the head of the room, her sharp gaze fixed on the large holographic display at the center of the table. The data scrolling across the screen painted a grim picture. The last remnants of their agricultural efforts were failing. Crops were dying at an alarming rate due to soil depletion, and the water supplies were being rationed in a desperate attempt to keep the cities from collapsing. Power outages had become a daily occurrence, and the grid that once powered the bustling cities was now barely functional. "General," Captain Harper said, her voice steady but heavy with the weight of the situation. "Tell me again how much longer we have." General Jackson, the military leader of the remaining human forces, looked up from the data slate in his hands. His face, hardened by years of service, betrayed a rare hint of uncertainty. "If we don't act fast, we're looking at maybe 6 months before food runs out completely. Water is down to less than 30% of what we need to survive. The power grid can barely support the hospitals and the water pumps, let alone the factories. And we have no way of replenishing our supplies." The silence in the room was deafening. Everyone knew the truth but had been unwilling to speak it aloud. They were running out of time. There was no miracle coming to save them. No new technology, no new discovery. The clock was ticking, and humanity's survival was in question. "We're on the edge of collapse," whispered Dr. Evelyn Rain, the chief scientist. Her voice cracked under the pressure. "At this rate, the next generation will never see a livable planet. They'll never know what it means to stand under a blue sky or walk through forests filled with life." Captain Harper closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of their despair settle over her like a dark cloud. Her mind raced for a solution, anything that might save them. But there was no easy answer, no quick fix. They had pushed the planet too far, and now the world was pushing back. But Captain Harper was not one to give up easily. Her eyes opened, and a fierce determination replaced the quiet despair. "We won't go down like this," she said, her voice hardening. "We'll fight. We'll fight for every inch of this earth. We'll fight for our families, for our children, for the future of our people. We're not going to die quietly in the dark." The others looked at her, their expressions a mix of disbelief and hope. They had heard those words before, from other leaders who had made promises that were never kept. But there was something in Captain Harper's voice that made them believe. Maybe, just maybe, they could still survive this. The question was, how? "We need a plan," Captain Harper continued, her tone now commanding. "We don't have much time. Every resource we have is precious. Every moment counts. We'll need to bring the best minds together, engineers, scientists, strategists, everyone who can help. And we need to act now." As the team began to strategize, mapping out their dwindling resources and potential solutions, Captain Harper stood by the window, looking out at the barren landscape. The fields once teeming with crops were now dry and cracked, the earth nothing more than a shell of what it had been. The skyline, once filled with towering cities, was now a collection of broken buildings and rusting metal. It was as if the world itself was dying before her eyes. 6 months, she whispered to herself, her heart sinking. That's all we have. A new threat looms. But as if the world wasn't enough of a nightmare, something even more terrifying loomed in the distance, something none of them could have predicted. Captain Harper's communicator buzzed urgently, pulling her from her thoughts. She pressed a button, and Admiral Marcus Reeves' face appeared on the screen. His expression was grim. "Captain, you need to see this," the Admiral said, his voice tight with tension. Harper turned sharply toward the door, motioning for her team to follow her. They moved quickly through the winding hallways of the underground facility until they reached the central command room, where the Admiral and his team were already gathered around a massive holographic map of the solar system. "What's going on?" Captain Harper asked, her voice betraying her concern. "The probes," Admiral Reeves began. "They've picked up something. Something big. Something not human." A series of images flashed on the screen, each one more detailed than the last. At first, they were vague, just flickers of light on the edge of the solar system. But as the images grew clearer, the scale of what they were looking at became evident. Massive ships, far larger than any human-made vessel, moved through space, their dark outlines ominous against the backdrop of the stars. The ships were covered in sharp angles and jagged edges, their surface dotted with weapons and shields that seemed to shimmer with deadly energy. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands, and they were heading straight for Earth. "Who are they?" General Jackson asked, his voice cold. "We don't know yet," Admiral Reeves replied, his voice tight with anxiety. "But they're coming, and we have less than a day to prepare." Captain Harper's heart sank. Just when they thought they had nothing left to lose, an alien force appeared, threatening to finish what the Earth's environment had started. Her mind raced as she thought of the implications. Earth's resources were already at their breaking point. They had no way of knowing what kind of technology these aliens possessed, or what their intentions were. But one thing was certain. They weren't here to negotiate. "All right," Captain Harper said, taking a deep breath. "We'll do what we've always done. We'll fight. For the planet. For humanity." As the team began to mobilize, preparing for the unknown threat that approached, Captain Harper knew that this would be the ultimate test of human ingenuity and resilience. Earth's survival was no longer just a question of resources. It was now a battle for existence itself, and humanity would either rise to the occasion or fall, along with the planet they had once called home. The arrival. The silence in the command center was suffocating as the images of the alien fleet continued to flicker across the holographic screen. The sight of those massive ships, each one imposing in its own way, sent a chill down the spine of every person in the room. They were not merely visitors. They were a threat, a danger that humanity had never encountered before. Captain Harper stood at the front of the room, her hands clasped behind her back as she stared at the screen. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders. She had been in charge of many operations in her career, but none like this. This wasn't just about military strategy or politics. It was about the survival of the human race. "Admiral, what are we dealing with?" Captain Harper's voice cut through the tension, sharp and demanding. Admiral Marcus Reeves, the seasoned veteran who had led humanity's defenses for years, glanced up at her. His face was pale, his usual stoic demeanor shattered by the gravity of the situation. "We don't have enough information, Captain. The probes only captured images. But from what we can tell, these ships are armed to the teeth. Plasma cannons, shield generators. We are not prepared for this." Harper nodded, her mind racing. She thought of Earth's dwindling resources, how they had barely managed to secure enough food and water to sustain their population for another 6 months. The cities were crumbling, the power grid was failing, and now this alien force was heading straight for them. The thought of an invasion was almost too much to bear. "How much time do we have?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as though saying it out loud would make it real. 24 hours, Admiral Reeve replied. "At best. The alien fleet is moving quickly. Their technology is far beyond ours. Their ships are capable of traveling faster than anything we've ever built. They'll reach Earth's orbit within a day, maybe less." The room fell into stunned silence as those words settled in. 24 hours. That was all they had. General Jackson stood up, his face a mask of determination. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to land. We need a plan. Now." Captain Harper nodded. "Exactly. We don't know what their intentions are, but we can't afford to assume they'll be peaceful. We need to be ready for a fight." A murmur of agreement ran through the room. The team quickly began to mobilize, calling in all available units and preparing their defenses. But even as they rushed to prepare for battle, Captain Harper couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom that gripped her heart. The odds were stacked against them. They were outmatched, outgunned, and outnumbered. It was as though they were preparing to fight a battle they were destined to lose. "I'll contact the leadership councils," said Dr. Evelyn Rain, the chief scientist, as she hurried to her station. "We need to consolidate every resource we have. If there's even a chance of defending Earth, we'll need everything, every person, every weapon, every piece of technology we've got." Captain Harper turned to her, her voice firm. "And what about the civilians? Where do we stand on evacuations?" "There aren't enough ships for a full evacuation," Dr. Rain replied, her tone grim. "We can't afford to spread ourselves thin. We'll need to protect the critical zones, the cities, the research centers, the food and water facilities. If they hit us in the wrong places, we could be finished before we even get a chance to fight back." The tension in the room was palpable as the team continued to prepare for the unknown threat. The clock was ticking, and every second felt like an eternity. First contact. The first sign that the aliens had arrived came not with the thunderous crash of ships breaking the sound barrier, but with a strange hum, a low, vibrating pulse that seemed to emanate from the atmosphere itself. It was unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. For a moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath, as if the very planet was aware that something monumental was about to happen. "Captain, they're here," Admiral Reeve said, his voice strained. He was staring at the massive holographic map, his eyes fixed on the approaching fleet. They'd just entered Earth's orbit. The giant alien ships hovered above the planet, their dark outlines casting ominous shadows over the surface below. The Earth's satellites, still functioning at limited capacity, picked up the first signs of the fleet's descent. Hundreds of them. Massive ships with gleaming surfaces, covered in strange markings and armed with weapons that seemed to pulse with energy. "Is there any way to communicate with them?" General Jackson asked. "Some kind of message, anything?" "We've tried," Dr. Rain said, her voice tinged with frustration. "Their signals are unlike anything we've ever seen. We're getting nothing in terms of a response. It's all just static, like they're purposely blocking our attempts to make contact." Captain Harper paced the room, her mind racing. She had seen this before, alien forces coming from the unknown, threatening everything in their path. But this time, it was different. This time, they weren't just a curious species coming to explore the stars. This time, they had their sights set on Earth, and humanity was nothing but an obstacle. "We need to prepare for an assault," Captain Harper said, her voice steady. "Get the defenses up, rally the military. We'll hold them off as long as we can. We may not have much time, but we will fight." As the military prepared for the worst, Captain Harper stood in front of the holographic map, her gaze locked on the alien fleet. They were no longer just ships in the distance. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the planet's survival now rested on humanity's ability to resist them. "We may not know what they want," Harper murmured, "but they've made one thing clear. They're not here for peace." The first attack. The first wave of the alien assault came swiftly and without warning. No negotiation, no words, just destruction. The sky lit up as the alien ships fired their first salvo, sending shockwaves across the atmosphere. From space, massive beams of energy struck the surface of the Earth, hitting critical military bases and cities in rapid succession. It was a coordinated strike, a display of raw power that left no room for doubt. These aliens were here to conquer. The Earth's defenses scrambled to respond, but it was already too late. The alien ships fired again, this time targeting Earth's space defenses. Satellites exploded in the air, sending debris raining down on the planet. The ground shook as the shockwaves from the blasts reached the surface, toppling buildings and sending chaos through the streets. "Brace for impact," Captain Harper shouted into her communicator, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We have to protect the cities. Deploy everything we have." Admiral Reeves' voice came through the comms, strained with desperation. "We're being overwhelmed, Captain. The alien weapons are too powerful. We need more time." "We don't have time," Harper snapped, her mind racing for a solution. "We fight. This is our world, and we're not going to let them take it without a fight." As the world was rocked by the alien bombardment, humanity's last hope rested on the shoulders of the soldiers, scientists, and leaders who had gathered in that command center. The battle for Earth had begun, and there was no turning back. A glimmer of hope. Despite the devastation, a spark of hope flickered within the human heart. Humanity had faced insurmountable odds before: war, disease, famine, but every time they had persevered. It was not just about survival. It was about the will to continue. The alien fleet was vast, but humanity's ingenuity, resilience, and determination could still turn the tide. "We may be on the brink of destruction," Captain Harper said, standing tall in front of her team, "but we are human. And if there's one thing humanity has always been good at, it's the impossible." The battle had only just begun. The fate of Earth, and all of humanity, was hanging by a thread. But as long as there was hope, they would fight. And in the heart of every soldier, every scientist, and every leader, one thing was certain: humanity would not go down without a fight. The glimmer of hope had appeared. Now it was time to make the impossible possible. The resistance rises. The first attack had left the world in disarray. Cities lay in ruin, space stations had been obliterated, and Earth's skies now bore the scars of alien firepower. Despite the unimaginable destruction, something stirred in the hearts of those who survived: the fierce, unrelenting spirit of humanity. They weren't just fighting for their homes or their cities anymore. This was a battle for the very soul of the human race, a fight for their right to exist. And while the odds seemed impossibly high, humans had always proven one thing: against all adversity, they would rise. In the remains of the command center, Captain Harper stood resolute, her eyes scanning the tactical holographic map, which now showed a rapidly shrinking defense perimeter. The alien fleet was massive, far beyond anything they had ever encountered, but humanity had never been one to surrender without a fight. Admiral Reeve approached her, his face lined with fatigue, but his eyes burned with the same fierce determination she had seen in him for years. "We need more time, Captain. But it's not just the Space Forces anymore. They've hit the ground, military and civilian targets alike. Our defensive lines are crumbling faster than we can reinforce them." Harper's mind raced. The alien ships had already decimated the main military hubs, and their ground forces were rumored to be just as powerful as their ships. Hovering mechs with devastating plasma cannons, towering robotic soldiers that could crush tanks with a single blow, and warriors in dark armor whose movements were as fluid and deadly as the creatures they seemed to be. Humanity's greatest military forces were now in a losing battle against an enemy they didn't fully understand. "Admiral," Captain Harper began, her voice unwavering, "we don't need time. We need to turn this around. The aliens are overconfident. They think this is an easy win, but they've underestimated us. We've got one advantage they don't. We fight for more than just survival. We fight because we believe in something greater than ourselves." She turned back toward the map, placing her fingers on the glowing interface. "We know their technology, their patterns. We can adapt. We don't need to face them head-on. We need to make them bleed. Give our forces the intel they need. It's time to start hitting back." A new weapon. The world was in a state of chaos, but amid the devastation, humanity's greatest strength lay in its ability to innovate. Dr. Evelyn Rain, the chief scientist, had been working on a project for years, a long-term initiative aimed at creating new, sustainable energy sources for a dying planet. But now, with the world on the brink, her research had taken on new importance. The project she had been developing might just be the key to humanity's survival. The energy source she had been working on, codenamed Prometheus, after the Titan who had brought fire to mankind, was revolutionary. It could harness and amplify energy from the planet's core, providing an almost limitless power source. However, its potential weaponization had not been fully explored. If they could adapt Prometheus to be used as a defense mechanism, they might just stand a chance against the alien invaders. The project's development had been kept under wraps, but now, Dr. Rain knew they had no time to waste. She convened a team of the world's top engineers and physicists to rework the Prometheus technology for military use. "We need to move quickly," Dr. Rain said, her voice urgent as she paced around a large console in the dimly lit lab. "This energy source can be turned into a weapon, something that could give us the edge. If we can harness it in time, we might be able to disable their ships, even damage their ground forces, but we need precision. This is a one-shot deal." General Jackson, who had been monitoring the situation from the tactical command center, appeared beside her. "How long will it take?" "With all resources focused on it, I estimate we could have a prototype within 48 hours, Dr. Rain replied. "But we'll need to install it in multiple locations. It's going to take a concerted effort." "Good," General Jackson said with a nod. "That's all the time we've got. Let's make it happen." Gathering the last of the defenders. As the Prometheus weapon system began its final stages of development, the resistance forces continued to fight back against the invaders. In cities now reduced to rubble, in the ashes of what was once humanity's greatest civilizations, small pockets of human soldiers, rebels, and civilians had begun to band together. They were not the elite military units, but the everyday people who had refused to accept the fate the aliens had planned for them. On the ground, soldiers of the human resistance organized into guerrilla forces. The military's higher commands were still functional, but they were struggling against the superior technology of the aliens. It was the civilians, farmers, engineers, even children who had lost everything, who had taken it upon themselves to defend their homes, to stand and fight for their future. Captain Harper had always believed in the power of human resilience. When the rest of the world had fallen to despair, it was the human spirit that had kept the flame of hope alive. Now, it was time for that spirit to shine brighter than ever before. "We may not have the firepower they do," Captain Harper addressed a growing army of resistance fighters, "but we have something they don't: our will, our ingenuity, and our love for our planet. We will use the land, the cities, and the very terrain to our advantage. We'll turn this world into a weapon they can't defeat." Among the many soldiers now gathering to her cause was Lieutenant Zoe Carter, a former farmer turned soldier. She had fought in the trenches, her hands once used for planting seeds now gripped tightly around a rifle. "What's the plan, Captain?" she asked, her voice steady, though her eyes were filled with the fire of a warrior who would never back down.